to discuss the moments that could define the year. Political commentator Tomlinson joins us. Very warm welcome to you and Happy New Year to you as well. An extraordinary year that
Happy
we've
New
just
Year.
had, really, Connor, isn't it?
Well, it's astounding we survived it, wasn't it? It was a pretty strange one to have gone through. I think this and 2022, to look at stories both retrospectively and perhaps what's going to be the most important in the year to come, it's probably best to look at it almost like a Cold War conflict brewing, because you've got the UK and the US taking flagship on a lot of, mainly the UK's domestic stories, and then the US sort of electoral stuff and this question as the global hegemonic superpower on the world stage. And then you've got China and Russia looming with their, obviously the Winter Olympics coming up. There's going to be a lot surrounding that, and obviously questions about energy security as it comes to COP27 when it comes towards the end of the year. Another big party that probably won't achieve all that much.
About domestically, looking at Keir Starmer, has he presented himself, do you think, as a credible leader of the opposition?
I don't think Angela Rayner would say so, because he seems to have the knack for not telling her all that much. I think Keir Starmer has done perhaps even the smart thing in what we saw a massive poll boost when he took a bout of self-isolation. He stopped stepping on rakes as he did in 2020 a little bit, with sort of BLM taking the knee and then stepping back on the defunding the police narrative. And then he didn't show up to some of the by-elections in Bexley, where I am, and then in North Shropshire. He was a decidedly absent presence. And Labour didn't make many gains in there. It was actually the Lib Dems who seem to be masters of the protest vote at this point. They don't seem to be wanting to make much of a stand at a national election, because they don't have much of a standpoint of what they want to go on as a post rejoin the EU disastrous campaign that Joe Swinson ran in 2019. But they do seem to be wanting to challenge the Tories. I know the current leader said he wanted to challenge Dominic Raab's constituency quite prominently next time in the year to come. So I don't think Keir Starmer's really the man to win Labour any elections. I think he's the sort of person that at the moment is very much of the doctrine, don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake.
You say that, but Labour has the biggest lead since 2014, a 9-point lead at the beginning of December, just looking at my figures now. And even just up to 4 days ago, Labour on 39%, 7 points ahead of the Conservatives. If he's no good, how come?
Because I think the Tories have committed suicide, and unlike the brilliantly politically enlightened viewers of GB News, there are quite a few people out there that watch a lot of mainstream media and will treat politics like it's a football team. So if one side's losing, let's go with the second best one that might be seeming to score some fun goals. So people don't really seem to understand that Labour isn't providing much of a principled opposition. They're not much of an opposition party at all, voting with the Tory government on pretty much every restriction they're going to do. In fact, the only tenable opposition seems to be the backbenchers at this point. Though I do think it's quite an interesting point that Boris is being staved off future restrictions, because my prediction would be that he sees a defeat in the Commons if he goes to push another lockdown with current statistics. I think Labour are very happy they've got vaccine passports as a predicate of future policy, but now they see it as safe to rebel. So again, it doesn't seem that Labour is going to be a tenable opposition. It seems that they're winning points by default because the Tories under Boris's leadership are being very unpopular at the moment.
And is that what we saw in the Shropshire North result, do you think?
I would say so. I mean, you didn't have many tenable Tory voters coming out and turning out. The same thing with Bexley. There were a lot of people that just stayed home. They voted for the Lib Dems, mainly a protest vote. Quite a few people were saying that in various interviews across the newspapers. And then you saw actually gains for reform in Bexley as a sort of Tory alternative. Obviously, Bexley's been quite a staunch sort of centre-right seat. I mean, they voted for UKIP pretty early on, and it was definitely a heavy Leave seat, despite it being on the cusp of London. So I think people are going to start to look for alternatives, and even lifelong Tory voters. I mean, I know some people in my family that used to go before. My dad, for example, he always said, oh, before I voted sort of tactically of who I thought would win, but now I'm just going to vote on principle because I can't trust that they're not going to get in and just go against what they said in the first place. So I'd rather my vote counted and you know, made an alternative party viable than just vote for the bigger guy.
And we all remember watching the Lib Dems burst that Boris bubble as they did when they won North Shropshire. Vince Cable on this station talking about Lib Dems making it back into the mainstream once again. Your views on that?
Oh, I think there's some pretty high hopes from Vince Cable there. I'd say the Lib Dems are being principled at least on COVID lockdowns. I think that's winning them some brownie points with at least the anti-lockdown pushback crew. But frankly, in the general election standpoint, what do they particularly stand for? I mean, the last time that you had a tenable Lib Dem election leader was Nick Clegg, and then obviously he went back on all of his promises on the student loans thing, and now he's leading one of the most unpopular companies in the world, Facebook as their sort of trust and safety executive, and not doing a very good job of that. So the Lib Dems' reputation seems to be in tatters. I think that what they could do actually is to make themselves more electorally palatable. I know we've got the Beijing Olympics coming up. If they become, as has happened on your network with some Lib Dem politicians, a bit more of a stalwart voice on China and leading not just a diplomatic but a sort of financial and cultural rebellion against the country, I think that post-COVID would put them in a much stronger light.
And getting away from domestic politics for a bit, you've already started to do that, moving to the international stage. What about Afghanistan, that retreat from Afghanistan, done so hastily, and it says, and we're told by many of the senior military personnel within the British Armed Forces, that it was done at the behest of Joe Biden without much communication with the Brits. What did you make of that in terms of the geopolitical significance of that decision?
I don't think Joe Biden's the best man to look to for competent communication. Let's be honest, I don't even know he thinks he's made it to the next year. Biden's poll numbers will continue being free fall from that, and also in terms of energy security. And that's also a very important question, again, coming back to something like China and Russia. In this global vying for resource dominance, as we seem to go more towards renewables, Afghanistan's got massive lithium deposits. China already makes 80% of battery capacity worldwide, and that's who most of us rely on for our cars, our solar panels, our power stations. So if China goes in and subsumes that with their Belt and Road Initiative, their imperialistic ambitions in the African subcontinent and the Middle East, well, that will prove disastrous for all of us. And it means that the global hegemony of America, the sort of making the world safe for democracy doctrine that George Bush started 20 years ago, with that receding, it means that other countries will start looking to places like China for infrastructure loans and get hooked on that. And so the sides in this coming Cold War will begin to ossify, and America will look quite weak.
Some analysts say that China's not interested in the traditional kind of confrontational, warlike postures of previous nations, and they're just getting on with their own form of domination with a sort of soft colonialization. What do you make of that?
That's very true. So their Silk and Road Initiative is basically giving loans to countries that are looking for infrastructural development and then bringing them into their social credit system. They want a digital Silk Road. So by making countries default on their loans, they're just snatching up territory like it's a monopoly board. And then they're also doing this thing called fifth generational warfare. This is why they own companies like TikTok, or they own cultural institutions like video game companies. And this is why in their own country, they've banned video games and banned what they would like to call effeminate male celebrities and things like that. They're trying to ossify their population as being very strong and stalwart and obedient to the Chinese Communist Party, but then they're doing what Yuri Bezmenov called in the USSR in the late 80s, early 90s, was ideological subversion. They're trying to infiltrate the culture of other countries, weaken their morale, incite domestic tensions between politics, and so that means that they win by default. And it clearly, in some sad way, is working, because one, we're committing sort of environmental suicide in rushing forward into renewables and buying all of the technology that China makes. And also, we've just made it so that during the pandemic, we've rewarded China for unleashing COVID on us, because now we've replaced Germany with China as our leading trade exporter, and that's where we buy all our tests, our masks, etc. China are getting very rich, and we're tearing ourselves apart at their behest.
A quick word about COP26, a yes or a no, is it worth it?
The fringe events were very much worth it. I was in attendance. I spoke to quite a few politicians and industry experts, and they seemed very happy with the sort of business market-led approach. But the main halls where they had the Little Amal refugee activism and Greta Thunberg screaming, crying in the streets and that, no. Again, China, Russia, etc., they won't be abiding by these commitments. And so it seems to be Britain's the sacrificial lamb to tank our economy for 1% of emissions when China's going to have to do a 16-fold by 2030. Seems pretty silly.
Conor Tomlinson, an interesting point of view. Great to hear what you think about what's been happening in the political and international environment over the last year. Speak to you again very soon. In the meantime, Happy New Year.
You too.